just to set the stage real quick, this is the first of a number of panels we're going to do over the next few weeks on chain abstraction as part of our chain abstraction series for Modular Media. We're also doing a bunch of different native Twitter and Substack content, such as like the two articles that actually Liam wrote. So shout out to my co-host here. Um, and yeah, this first one is just going to be on a higher level before over the next few weeks we drill into each of the different parts of the of chain abstraction. And Liam, I think we're gonna like roughly base this off of kind of the articles that you wrote. I know you have some questions and you'll take the lead on that, and then we'll kind of dive in from there.
Sure, sounds great. Thanks for the toss. Both Pedro and Dino, thanks for having me up. It's been fun work with you guys on these topics. I'm also super stoked to be here today. Let's make this fun. No need to impress anyone on you know, uh, vocab or funny ways to say things. Let's keep it real. Let's keep this fun, and let's do, I think, what we're all here for, and communicate to users like why all this is important. Just as a brief background, I'm Liam. I lead growth at Fairblock. I've been asked to kind of vibe set for the session today. So just wanted to start out by setting the stage a bit. This is intended to be a rather higher level introductory chat about the different focus areas of chain abstraction teams, as well as the opportunity areas for further research and development. So I wanted to maybe have the first question be where I can kick it off to anyone here. I know, though, that Tabasco has written a pretty extensive article about this, but so let's start with, what chain abstraction is, and what the mission of teams building in this space should be. Tabasco, or if anyone else wants to kick it off, let's start there.
Yeah, for sure. So, we when we first got into, the chain abstraction when it was still very early, we noticed that there hadn't really been like a formal way to define it or understand the vertical. And so we did an article a few months ago that was basically trying to introduce a formal definition of chain abstraction and give it a little bit of scope around like, well, what really is chain abstraction trying to achieve? And so essentially, the best way to understand it is that chain abstraction is an experience exempt from the manual processes required to interact with multiple chains. And so this just boils down to chain abstraction basically creates an experience where users don't need to do things like bridging or cognitively managing their balances across multiple chains, or even maybe downloading multiple different wallets for different chains, or needing to understand at all necessarily like the underlying blockchain that an application is using. And so this basically creates an experience that you can understand as chain agnostic for end users. And so users no longer have relationships with the blockchains that they're using necessarily. I mean, they don't need to. But rather they're just using applications. And so this is the easiest way to understand chain abstraction. It's a shift from the fact that today users are interacting both with applications and explicitly with blockchains. And chain abstraction is changing that to, rather than explicitly interacting with blockchains as a very obvious and loud component of the experience, they're just using applications, and blockchains are an underlying infrastructural component of those applications. And so the experience is far more akin to like how GCP and AWS and Microsoft Azure and stuff like that is handled within Web 2. It's like, I don't care what cloud provider Twitter is using. It's just like, it works for me, and they're using whatever works best for them. And that seems to work well enough. And so the same kind of attitude is being applied to applications in Web3, and how they decide what chain that they use and how that translates to the user experience.
Awesome. What would you say is like the biggest North Star for chain abstraction? What is, or what are some examples of like this end user experience that teams should prioritize chasing?
In terms of the ultimate goal on the user experience level, it should just simply be that users by default don't need to know at all what chains they have funds on, what chains they're using for an application. By default, the experience needs to be completely removed from the blockchains that are being interacted with. And this is my opinion. This isn't like an objective thing. People will argue about the degree of abstraction, all these different things. But I think on a standard basis, the ideal experience and like the ultimate goal for all of this is that a user on average by default should not have to understand or pay any mind to where their balances are or what blockchains they're interacting with. Although importantly, I think that this ideal experience is, I mentioned the term by default intentionally because I do think that like the ideal experience and kind of ultimate UX is being created here is not forced, right? So this is really important. Still, if I, as a power user, want to know what funds my chains are, or what chains my funds are on, or know what chains are underlying the applications that I'm interacting with, then I should absolutely have that power. But by default, the user experience needs to be completely removed from the notion of distinct blockchains.
Yes, totally agree. Mayor, Lane, or Alton, do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think we had a conversation with Tabasco prior because I had a bunch of folks here in the podcast that I hosted for Near. Although I agree to a point that users shouldn't agree what you just shouldn't care about the blockchain that they're in. The one thing that this community needs to work on is like metrics around if there's a new blockchain that pop up and there's an application that immediately people trust and suddenly the blockchain is insecure, then this has an impact on the user. So that's something a lot of us should think and probably put a framework around. But apart from that, I agree with Tabasco that like I've been around a lot of like very painful user experience around like when in 2020, 2021, I think it's improving. And I think the end goal is to get the user experience to a point where you can move around different chains in a couple of seconds or maybe milliseconds, to be honest. And the users just can do whatever they like without thinking about a VM, thinking about it, whatever that are quite nerds care about, but not the users at all.
Awesome. I think maybe we can shift over to the next question from here, and this can probably queue up some space for Mayor and Lane as well. What would you guys say are the biggest technical hurdles we need to overcome to achieve chain abstraction, and how might teams, both existing and newer teams, how can they contribute to solving some of these challenges?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest one. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's the biggest one, but it's one I see talked about the least that I think is really important, and it's error handling. Like, if you look at what's really important for chain abstraction is to do cross-chain data, like intents, sure, that's everybody knows about that, but people won't ever really feel comfortable using intents until like the user experience is the same when something goes wrong. And right now, it's like each kind of intent protocol has a slightly different way to handle errors and surface them to the users, which just will never make a user feel psychologically safe when they're using a chain abstracted app.
When you say errors, do you mean like transactions failing, or maybe like, I don't know, like differences in like state transitions that I don't know, maybe were faulty if there wasn't like a ZK proof that was passed or something, or what do you?
I mean, yeah, I'm talking more generally about the like class of errors where something went wrong on like the destination chain where you're trying to execute the thing. But that obviously can like be invalid state transitions. It can be bad call data. It could be like, yeah, there's just not enough funds for anybody to do this and you have to update that. But there's a lot of each team kind of has a different approach to how they handle this right now, which makes it difficult to give that nice Web 2 UX feel that will like really make people feel comfortable using a chain abstracted system.
Is this kind of where like a standard for intents comes in, like a universal standard, I guess?
Kinda. It depends. I mean, there's a lot of places in intents where you could bring in a universal standard. Like there's the Uniswap across its standard. I forget what the ERC number is, for 826, I think. Where that's like intent discovery. right? And that's like really important for signaling and making sure you have a robust solver networks, and anybody can solve kind of any intent that follows that standard. But then there's a second one, which just I don't really see a lot of development around, which is like, okay, so that intent failed on that call with that call data because there wasn't enough money, or that intent failed. Do I refund the user on the origin chain? Those types of things.
Gotcha. Does anyone else have anything to add to the points that either Lane brought up, or to add different elements that we should be focusing on as it relates to chain abstraction?
No, I think what Lane said is, I think, extremely relevant, and it's something that we've been paying some mind to ourselves here at Arcana. But outside of that, I think fundamentally, if the experience is not like 10x better than what it is right now, then it simply won't be, I think, good enough for users to like accept 100%. And when I say 10x, it simply can't be a bridge integrated into a wallet. Because if you're going to end up tunneling that same asset across a bridge, you could probably get off from like do pretty well when you're moving assets L2 to L2. There'll be reasonable capital efficiency. It'll be quite fast and all of the sorts of things. But anything that you wanted to do beyond that, like if you wanted to do across L1s, or if you want to do L1 to L2, or any of those sorts of things, then you're going to not really have that experience. And this is where I think like intent-based like chain abstraction that happens through like liquidity fronting, as opposed to like just orchestrating a bridge within like an app interface or a wallet interface, will shine. But that's where I think ensuring that there is very high capital efficiency is something that we need to start paying a lot of mind to, because sure, the experience can be 10x, but if you're paying through your nose to get this sort of experience, then you have the other problem, which I think we should definitely be very mindful of.
Maybe let's move on to some other questions for now. In terms of maybe like some of the biggest technical hurdles, we talked a little bit about making sure that that costs remain low, that there's a standard for when there are transaction failures across chains, or I guess failures in synchrony is a better way to say that, maybe. Is there any other like technical hurdles that we should be considering? I'm personally thinking about maybe like gas standards, differences in latency, composability. What are some of these things that you guys think that are the biggest opportunity areas for people to focus on technically?
I can jump in here. Although like we are trying to abstract bridges, the problem I've been seeing is like there's a lot of like wrapped assets coming to the play in the industry. Like we've already seen sort of BitGo crisis, and now we're seeing a bunch of like wrapped assets that are like people are wrapping Sol to go to Binance, like BNB, like all these stuff is a bit scary from the user perspective, because there's a lot of assets, even though you are sitting on the chains that you're sitting, you're still buying these or like interacting these wrapped assets, which has like a lot of sort of trust assumptions of the bridges that's been used. So that's one thing to kind of think about, is that if we're doing chain abstraction, but we're still relying on bridged assets, are we really doing chain abstraction?
Good points. Yeah, I made a comment in my article that bridges are probably something that we will graduate from eventually, in terms of like how we should probably focus on like canonical asset transfers across chains. I'm personally super excited about teams like Union for this. Anything else people have in mind? Tabasco, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, it's
Dino,
all hand raised.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that maybe a little bit of a generic answer, but I think that solver risk is still something that I don't really consider to be completely solved. I think that like resource locks are great technology, and I think like One Balance is doing a great job with this. And also you have Rhinestone now, which is doing resource locks. I believe they actually have modules within their smart account standard for this. And so I think that's great. And like this definitely helps reduce solver risk, especially when it comes to reorgs and double spending and I mean all these things, which is I think helpful. But I wouldn't consider the problem to be completely solved because a lot of these implementations of resource locks are related. Risk reductions require migration to a new account standard or just something that isn't usable with existing accounts today. Right, so it's like I want to be able to use resource locks or similar things with like existing smart accounts or EOAs. I don't need to move to some new account implementation. I know that One Balance is doing some interesting things with like being compatible with all these different account standards, but in general, I do think it's an important consideration, especially as we start to further decentralize systems of solvers and like there needs to be a lower barrier to entry and reduce risk to really make it viable. And so I believe that this is an important problem, but I just don't think it's been completely solved yet. So it is something to continue working on, especially I think teams like One Balance and Rhinestone and of course many others are tackling this problem. And I think it's an important consideration.
Gotcha. So solver risks as it relates to end user UX through the wallet is what you mean by that, correct?
Yeah, I mean, for example, with Particle or with I believe
Yep.
even Arcana and other organizations use similar systems where essentially like what's happening is liquidity fronting with solvers.
Yep.
And so, during this process, whenever solvers are being repaid and liquidity is being fronted, there's risk attached to that, whether it's through reorgs or some enablement of double spending. I mean, these are things that need to be accounted for, and resource locks are a great way to reduce this.
Yep.
Because of course, like you can have a commitment that says like these funds are locked and you can 100% guarantee that they will be repaid to the solver and that like there won't be any double spending or loss of funds from the solver side in that case. And so it reduces risk significantly. But I just think that the implementation of those still has a little ways to go.
Got it. Got it. I think that's a good bridge into talking about maybe some of the end state for wallet user experiences in a chain abstracted future. I know that Arcana has worked on this. I know that Particle has worked on it too. Same with Near and Nuffle. I'm not exactly sure on like the Everclear approach to this, but let's open up the floor and talk about like desired end states for wallets and some of the optimizations that need to be made there.
Yeah, I can speak to this. We've obviously put out a few demos where we've taken our chain abstraction SDK, put it into like a wallet interface, and almost permissionlessly sort of provided chain abstraction features on apps like Uniswap, Aave, Hyperliquid, and a bunch of others. And this, I think, is definitely one direction that we should perhaps look to go, where we end up with certain standards on wallets, especially when it comes to like apps reading balances, to be able to kind of be displayed. And one of the big hurdles that we saw was I go to Aave and I have this chain abstracted wallet, which is essentially unifying my balances for different assets across different chains. But Aave is still reading, making their own RPC calls and getting their own balances, and then not even enabling like the supply button if I don't have balances. So we need like those sort of standards within like how like an app actually reads these balances and is able to kind of ascertain that there is more balance available to spend than is on a particular chain, because apps are essentially like chain based and wallets are also chain based. So this sort of like tussle sort of needs to be resolved, and I think the best way to do it is through some sort of standard interface that apps are able to kind of fetch these balances off of. But essentially, if we are able to kind of do that, then we get to a place where apps really don't have to like do anything to enable a chain abstracted experience. This can be delivered through an orthogonal solution like a wallet interface, and the users can pick whatever wallet they want and self custody their funds, and then be able to consequently be able to use these apps permissions permissionlessly, because there really isn't a scenario where an app doesn't want to enable this for their users, right? If you're an app in DeFi and a user has, say, 10 USDC on let's say chain A, but they have more USDC on a bunch of other chains, which basically means they can supply a whole lot more liquidity. No one's going to really say no to that. And so I basically think that like the end state could very well be apps sort of making this available without even needing to kind of do any sort of like real integration, and it's the wallet interfaces that actually sort of enable this for users and make it quite seamless. It's a bit of a hard take, but yeah, that's what I think could very well happen.
Euro, that's a hot take, and that means I hope you have an even hotter take for the end.
I guess to add on a little bit here for the wallet side of things, of course, we're also working at the account level, and trying to bring at least like a standard foundation of chain abstraction to accounts, specifically through just simply the consolidation of balances. I think is usually what's in scope of this wallet or account level. I think, in my opinion, one of the most important things, and like we've thought a lot about like how to optimize for this in the long term at Particle. It's I think overall wallet abstraction needs to be relatively unopinionated and globally applicable. And so what I mean by this is that as a user, I should be able to go to pretty much any application, and whether like I guess there's like usually two paths that the user will go down in terms of wallet abstraction. Either A, they're going to use some wallet or some interface that is providing chain abstraction. So like they download a wallet that maybe integrates some chain abstraction solution, or maybe the chain abstraction solution has their own wallet or whatever it may be. They use that, and then that's of course universally applicable across all applications, and that's their means of interaction. I think the second, probably somewhat more common implementation will be that a user is using MetaMask or Phantom or whatever, and they're going to an application that's integrated an SDK for one of these wallet abstraction solutions. And I think importantly, this should allow a user to basically, I should be able to go to any application, and any application that's using Particle or Arcana or One Balance or whatever should be able to have the same experience. And so I think this is important, and this is something that we're thinking a lot about. It's like, how, as a user, should I be able to interact with the entire ecosystem and have this chain abstraction experience? And whether the application chooses to use any of these solutions doesn't matter, because actually it's just the same. Like, as I don't care as a user, I just use it and it works for me. And it's up to the application. Same thing with like the whole thesis behind chain abstraction. It's that these infrastructural choices should be up to the application. I think the same thing should apply to wallet abstraction, unless, of course, the user explicitly chooses to use some solution that's already using one of these other providers. But I think overall, an application needs to make that decision, and it needs to be. When I say unopinionated, what I mean is that to the end user, the experience should be consistent across all the applications at the wallet level, regardless of what the application chooses to use. And so this means that as a user leveraging MetaMask, I should be able to go to all these applications and have a relatively equivalent experience with balance consolidation specifically. And so I think this is quite important, and at least this is my main priority right now when it comes to how wallet abstraction will progress at the long term. But I think to caveat that, we talk a lot about the layers of chain abstraction and how chain abstraction is composed, and you have the account level, and then you have like a more advanced application implementation of chain abstraction, all this stuff. And so, I think accounts are always going to have, in my opinion, a very specific purpose of just simply giving users universal access to their balances across chains. And so I think that is fundamentally all account level chain abstraction should do. And of course, you can tie in like gas abstraction and stuff like that into it, which makes sense and adds to that experience. But I think overall, that's the foundation of it, and it needs to be very consistent across all experiences.
It kind of sounds like MetaMask or some of these larger, like more adopted wallets. It kind of sounds like they're gonna get beat to the punch here. Maybe like more innovative protocol specific wallets, like the one that Particle is working on, the one that Arcana is working on, or like any of these other like newer solutions will be the ones to solve these problems first. Number one, before I ask my next question, is that your belief that like Phantom, MetaMask, these other guys will probably be phased out if they don't, compete on a chain abstraction level. Maybe the second question is like, how do you bootstrap this? How do you bootstrap a wallet? How do you get more like this in the most people's hands as possible?
So, if you asked me this question a year back, I would have said no chance in hell, because we actually started middle of last year trying to speak to some of these traders, etc., about this idea. We didn't even know it was called chain abstraction back then. We used to just call it credit, and we pitched this, and the people were like, "No way, I'm moving away." So there was this massive inertia of adopting new wallets. But since then, we've obviously seen the likes of Rabby and even in-app wallet solutions sort of eke into like MetaMask market share in a sense. And so today, if you ask me, can these incumbents be like usurped in a sense? I would say there is a reasonable chance that can happen, especially the likes of MetaMask and things like that. I think they move much slower than perhaps like a Rabby would, perhaps, and they're less inclined to adopt some of these more new innovative things, I would say in general. So can they be beat to the punch? I think that's already going to happen for sure. But then these guys just have so much going for them in terms of like pure, like in terms of distribution, in terms of like reliability, robustness, all of those sorts of things, that it might be harder for like a brand new wallet to come in and just like take over. But at the same time, I think it's just a function of these people adopting some of these solutions, whether it's Particle, whether it's Arcana, or whatever else, right? And like making this available to users sooner rather than later, because this is going to get proven out in production in a matter of weeks, maybe a couple of months at most, in my opinion. But we'll obviously go very slow, and it'll be available on fewer chains with fewer assets to start with, primarily because of security concerns. But I think over a period of time, it could very well happen that one of these things just adopts like one of the protocols that's getting built right now.
As a general note, wallets probably benefit the most from Lindy out of most any like thing that you can build in the ecosystem, just because self-custody wallet security is obviously incredibly important. That being said, if we're all buying into the chain abstracted world with a Web 2 UX, that also, to me at least, implies that like there's a whole new segment of customers that would now be willing to come in and join crypto and do things on different blockchains. That means to me, like any of these wallet companies could get disrupted if they make that process easier, because nobody's going to be able to use it in the way that like encourages them to stay within the ecosystem. And even if you're onboarding somebody completely new and you just want to get them on to like, all the different L2s, I don't really recommend MetaMask anymore, just because like the gas abstraction isn't great relative to some of the other options.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I do think that slow slow moving, or like the larger kind of slow moving wallets, that slow to action will definitely keep them from keeping market share as like the demand for chain abstraction or for chain abstracted wallet experiences grow. I'm pretty sure at this point everyone's sick of having to manage new wallets for new things on chain. So I'll hold the rest of my thoughts. Alton, do you want to?
Yeah. I have a question. Maybe this is an open one, but so historically in 21, 2022, everybody, when there's a new L1 or there's a new L2, there was a wallet for that blockchain, right? Like when you look at Near has its own wallet, and you go to like Starknet, there's like Argent there.
Right.
Does chain abstraction make easier for wallets to get into the market? What do y'all think? Like, does it help us to kind of get a better sort of like a time to market for anyone, and then see that like given this competition, like does they say 100 of them, does it experience that, do we improve as a space at all?
Like the actual wallet landscape will probably change a little bit. With chain abstraction, I mean, ideally, there won't even really be competition between wallets based on like the chains that they support, like there is now to some degree. I think that a lot of it's just going to come down to what provides the best experience, but it's also hard to compete with MetaMask and like these existing wallet giants. And so, like, I think that there's probably going to be two things that will happen. The first is that there will be a period of time where these larger wallets don't implement chain abstraction features, and there will be explicitly chain abstracted wallets that probably take most newer mindshare in the space. Ideally, users that are onboarding in the space, they will kind of be at chain abstracted wallets first and foremost, because that's ultimately what provides the best and most accessible user experience. And I think that these wallets are there's going to be many of them, I'm sure, and they'll compete based on what essentially provides the best experience and the best features and really what people want, not necessarily based on what chains are supported, because I mean it's chain abstraction, and so I think that to some degree we'll probably see less new wallets enter the market because of that. I think at the same time though, eventually I would be shocked if MetaMask, Phantom, and these guys didn't implement some degree of chain abstraction natively. I would be almost 100% sure that they would. And so, and they'd probably use some existing wallet abstraction provider because it could plug directly into something like that. And so, I think if this happens, it's not going to be as clear cut as like, okay, just the chain abstraction wallets that they're going to win. I think it'll become far more complicated thing where if MetaMask can implement that in a timely manner, then I think it'll make a lot of sense for users to keep using MetaMask. And it won't be as easy for these explicitly chain abstraction wallets to compete, because at that point it's just like, you know, marginal UX improvements. So I don't think that necessarily we're going to see MetaMask and Phantom and these wallets be phased out, given they do adopt this technology, which I think, especially as it proliferates, they probably will, because they'll realize that this is a must for user experience, and that they need it to stay competitive in the landscape. And so I don't really see these being phased out. And furthermore, I think that like a lot of these wallets that are more specific to certain L1s, like, you know, Starknet specific wallets or whatever, even like Solana specific wallets, stuff like that. I think a lot of them are going to have some trouble in this market, because if pretty much every wallet can equivocate the same network support, then why would anybody use a network specific wallet if I can use MetaMask and have the same experience, or I can use whatever other good wallet experience and not have to use whatever like is specifically developed for this ecosystem. And so I think we're going to see that market change a little bit. But yeah, I don't really see the big ones being phased out either.
I mean, to just specifically answer Altan's question, essentially, we've been speaking to a bunch of different wallets, and some of these wallets are, like even Tabasco mentioned, they are these L1 specific wallets, but now they're seeing lesser and lesser value in remaining that, and they now want to break into, like a Polkadot wallet wants to come into the EVM space and all of the sorts of things. They're seeing clear value in that, and the way they're looking to actually do this is through chain abstraction. And the second we start to like explain to them the possibilities, then you can see the gears sort of turning, and then it becomes extremely apparent to them that this is the way forward. So just to kind of also echo what Tabasco is saying, I think it's going to be like a no-brainer in my opinion.
Yeah, this makes sense. I want to open up the conversation to talk a little bit more about the intents space. I know that both Particle and Everclear are working on this. I'm curious to hear, maybe Lane, you can start. What role will intents play as they evolve, and how will this improve user experiences, and what new use cases might emerge as these types of intent networks mature?
In my mental model, the chain abstraction, like thesis, goal, whatever, it mirrors the same kind of UX improvement that Visa had, like when you switched over to using plastic instead of cash, especially if you consider like international travel, right? And if you look at the current credit card networks, like it's incredibly easy to use. People feel really comfortable using it, but there's a lot of really complicated problems that they're just completely shielding you from and haven't solved. I think that intent solvers specifically will play a similar role. Well, they'll be able to do the thing for you upfront quickly and take on a lot of that complexity in the back end. So if you think about chargebacks, or if you think about like fraud, how Visa generally handles it is like it's a line item, right? Like there's a certain amount of fraud that if you say it's fraud, they're just like, okay. And they build that into the fees that they charge you. And I think that a lot of these problems around like gas abstraction, latency will exist and cause really big problems for UX, but the intents and solver networks will all be there to kind of just soften that blow and take those complexities on for you as sophisticated actors in ways that like will allow you to just pay a fee and move on. And so that whole like error handling thing that I mentioned is like a big problem. I think that can actually be solved by just paying a fee to solvers to give you a nice experience. And they'll just handle the capital like uh-ohs or wherever their funds ended up when something went wrong on their end. And they'll take that complexity on for you.
This would be a funny time to quote Cal Samani and say, reasoning by analogy actively leads to the wrong conclusion. But I kid.
Sure, but look at
This
like
is
you look
good.
at anybody. I mean, look at our current protocol that's live, right? Like it's just huge
Yeah.
pain in the butt to go through all of like hold the local assets that our protocol can mint, to deal with like making sure your capital's on a usable chain or whatever. And that's something that users just should be completely insulated from and abstracted. Like it just shouldn't be something that they have to deal with. And there will always be people who are willing to wait and provide a service for you for a fee.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, okay, so this, I guess, maybe or might relate to what Tabasco was talking about earlier related to like solver risks. Do you think that maybe like the crypto ecosystem in terms of liquidity resources or like the complexity of solvers and what can be reliably transferred across chain right now? For example, like 7-day lag times, right? For fraud proofs, right? Can solvers absorb this burden right now? And if they can't, what is needed to get there?
I think a 7-day lag time is really tough, but if you look a little bit more into the expected future, when a lot of these systems switch over from kind of optimistic systems into more ZK proving systems, you're still going to have latencies that are acceptable for a service provider, but not acceptable for a general user. And that's just because of batching costs and hardware improvements that are on the time scales of multiple years, right? Sure. And so that's exactly where a solver comes in. It's like, okay, I'll deal with that. But talking like a 7-day capital lockup versus like, okay, a 4-hour capital lockup, I think is a lot different.
Yeah, right. That's definitely something that I think needs to be improved. That's personally why I'm optimistic about like some of the stuff that like the ag layer is doing with native bridge contracts inside of each ag layer chain, which could be interesting. I'm curious if anyone else has any other thoughts about this, either in terms of like the opportunity areas that intents will solve, or any direct responses to Lane.
I think like intents are probably the best way. Ultimately, like intent-based bridging and using solver-based bridging and stuff like this is probably the best way to, in my opinion, like achieve chain abstraction, especially at the account level and stuff like this. I mean, it just makes things extraordinarily simple, especially when it comes to just simply moving funds. I mean, like I think in a lot of cases, you look at the across-type model, even what we've done on our testnet and some things that we're hoping that will translate to mainnet. I mean, you can move funds across many chains in under 20 seconds, 15 seconds, 5 seconds, and it costs very little. And so like a lot of this is due to the implementation of intents. Although I think importantly, the point that I wanted to make here is that intents are not a requirement for chain abstraction. I think a lot of the time there is somewhat of a conflation between intents and being an absolute necessity for chain abstraction. I think that it is probably the best technology that you can use for cross-chain and stuff like this, and we at Particle have recognized this and we use it ourselves. But I think that you're starting to see some products pop up that don't actually use intents or solver-based bridging and stuff like this. I think Cluster is a good example of this. They don't use intents at all, and so like I think that intents are absolutely a fundamental technology of chain abstraction, and I think it's clear that like most implementations, most chain abstraction projects are centered around intents as an underlying architecture. But I do think that it is not one-to-one tied to chain abstraction to where it's an absolute requirement, because you are seeing some implementations that take different routes. But that's just the kind of the caveat I want to make there.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. We've talked a little bit about intents and kind of the need to verify, or what was the Lane? What was the way that you phrased your first claim about important elements that we need to focus on? It was the differences in like what was it?
I,
Like how each network deals with like faults or like
yeah, yeah,
failed transactions. What
exactly.
was the term you used?
I mean, I called it error handling. You called it, I think, synchronization issues.
Failures or
Failures,
something?
yeah.
I don't know. I don't have
I
a
prefer
great
yours,
way to say this
honestly.
just
It's more
yet.
specific.
Okay. All right. Cool. Okay. So I think like, with intent networks, there could be, I guess, this future where there are synchronization failures or just like incorrect um, differences or cues for like state transitions as capital or messages moves across chains. Are you guys seeing verifiable computation be an important consideration in a chain abstracted future? Like, are teams taking this seriously? Are they not? And whatever way this goes, where do you guys think ZK fits into this chain abstracted future?
I can speak a little bit to this. I don't know about ZK, but verifiable computation is something that we are hoping to, not even verifiable computation as much as like data availability
Yeah.
is something that we are looking to kind of leverage. We're working with the team at Avail to actually improve security guarantees when it comes to essentially solver payouts. Like when do you pay out a solver? You pay them out once there is a certain degree of certainty that the user assets have been locked up. This I'm of course talking about like a pure intent-based system. So user assets are locked up and are available to be settled if and only if the solver has indeed like filled that liquidity requirement for the user on some destination chain. But who's going to like tell whatever it is that is holding these funds to release these funds, and then with what sort of authority is this settlement happening? So, like in our case, the Avail team, they're doing such a great job with their data availability, and they're now going to extend it with their new product Nexus, which is essentially going to provide these data availability proofs and aggregate them across all these different layer 2s and layer 1s and whatnot. And we are looking to actually leverage that to be able to, with authority, and they have this concept of being able to verify and provide a verification certificate that indeed these set of transactions did happen. And then consequently, you can, with some amount of like confidence, do these sort of settlements finally to a solver. And that I think is going to play a major role going forward, especially on the settlement side, in my opinion. Outside of course, all the great work that's happening around credible commitments and ensuring that users cannot end up double spending an asset, irrespective of reorgs or any of these issues that you and Lane were talking about. So that I think is definitely something that we intend to rely a lot on, and I think that's something that maybe others can also start to look at more deeply.
Got it. Thanks, Mayor. Does anyone else have any comments about verifiable state transitions, anything related to ZK, and how this fits in to chain abstraction?
I think it makes I think it was Tabasco who was saying it, where you can have really good chain abstraction without having solvers or intents present. That really like gets up leveled by having verifiable computation, especially like
Totally.
low latency verifiable computation. If you have really low latency verifiable computation, then you may not need intents or solvers.
Yeah. Whoa.
Oh, that's a
You
good
should have saved
spike.
that,
God
Lane. You
dang
should have
it.
saved that. That was good. If no other further comments on that, maybe we can start to wrap this up. Let's do a quick round of hot takes of the future of chain abstraction and what's to come.
My hot take, and I'm of course extremely biased when I say this, is that I think solver intent and solver based chain abstraction is what will win out definitely in the short to medium term. I think like relying on orchestrating like existing bridge infrastructure and trying to leverage that to do like a more holistic chain abstraction will not really work, or it'll work great inside of like the EVM ecosystem, like L2 to L2 and things like that. But that can just work just as well with what Across already has. We don't really need any like more of that, in my opinion. I think this is what will win out in the short to medium term, until unless like if you end up with this extremely low latency bridging, ag layer does something fantastic and people are able to look past the fact that Polygon is building it and actually adopt it and things like that. So yeah, that's what I think.
Good take. Anyone else?
My hot take maybe is a little bit less like tech oriented. I have actually Mayor asked on one of the recent live streams for a hot take, and I talked about how I wasn't convinced about ag layer and stuff like that. But I think my take is that um, probably 60% at least of the projects that are binding themselves to chain abstraction or are using this term are not actually chain abstraction, and I don't think truly understand what this term means. I think that chain abstraction is enormously overused as an idea, and a lot of the time exceeds the confines of the scope that we've established for it. And I think that over time, especially as chain abstraction really proliferates, we'll start to see a consolidation of projects who like are actually building chain abstraction, aren't just trying to use it as like a temporary boost or whatever. I think those are what's going to survive long term, and I think a lot of that, especially the more recent, um, uh, you know, projects that have been trying to bind themselves to this, I think probably won't last as long in this vertical. And I think importantly, chain abstraction as a narrative and as an idea, I think if it's truly successful, actually won't be a popular term. If we have to constantly talk about chain abstraction, if people need to be aware about chain abstraction, I don't think the ideals that we're talking about have actually been achieved. And so I think that it's a temporary topic that is a little bit overused right now. But I think that yeah, if it's successful, then we'll actually see less of it.
I think, man, I totally agree with you, actually.
Like I do remember when the modular term was more of like a super researchy like right curve thing, and like if anything it was hard enough for any new narrative to get like memed into existence, right? But like everyone seemed to see that get very popular, and then that ended up getting a little bit, I mean, clearly we're still very interested in kind of the modular space, and there's a lot of like a lot of merit to it, of course, but it did get diluted in some ways, and it was almost like, but I kind of saw that happen, like I saw kind of before the pre-dilution phase, but building like focusing so much like on Fluent over the past year, I'll admit like I was a little bit late to the chain abstraction stuff, right? And I'm coming in with like a hobbyist like researcher mindset, and my first kind of run in with some of the chain abstraction work is like, oh wow, it seems very fluffy. Like what is this? Is this just a strict like buzzword? Is there anything here? And it took me actually like longer than I would have thought to like kind of parse through it more. And so I guess my hot take was going to be similar to kind of an extension of what Tabasco said, where I think for it to be like sustainable and for people to like take it seriously for like a long period of time, until ultimately it diminishes when we solve all the problems. I think we should get kind of sharp. We should get sharper and sharper and sharper with what it actually means.
I think it's building a new blockchain is not chain abstraction.
Love it. Yes, I agree with you. You got anything, or have you
No.
have you tapped your hot take resources for the day?
I think I've tapped my hot take resources for the day. Yeah, I mean, I'll just double down
Okay,
on what I said previously. Is like I do think
cool.
intents and solver, the success of those networks is deeply tied to latency within the proving systems or the underlying systems.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. I think my hot take in relation to our conversation is that wallets will probably be a one wallet takes all, at least in like different local markets. Similar to how like I think Venmo, right, is like the leading like digital payments app, at least in the US, or at least in like the younger generation of the US. There are different parts of the world where, people prefer to use different things. And, Western economies, there's probably going to be one wallet takes all or one wallet eats all. Eastern economies, there's probably going to be one wallet eats all. And there's not going to be much room to steal market demand from those leading wallets. I'm sure I have some more, but I will leave it there for the next panel. In terms of closing this off, Pedro, Dino, do you guys have a way that you guys typically close this, or should we just inspire everyone to live their best lives this weekend? Not sure where everyone is, but it's Labor Day here in the U.S. Hope you guys get some sunlight and or at least keep shipping, keep cooking. We're proud of you guys. Thanks for all the work you guys do.
Thank you so much, everybody who was listening in. Thankfully, this was like rug minimized. Honestly, so I mean, I say minimized because sorry, Manuel, man, we'll get you. You'll get it next time. I love you, but yeah, not too bad. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to our sponsors too. Everclear, Particle Network, Nuffle, and Arcana, and those who represent them today on stage. Thank you guys for joining.